Hey there, how's it going? My name is David and you're watching KCRC. Thank you for stopping by today. So on today's video, it's going to be quite a departure from what you would normally expect to see on this channel. I'm afraid there's no Tamiya today, no Kyosho. Today we're going to be taking a look at this, the Yokomo YZ-2 Cal 3.1 high-end two-wheel drive buggy. So if you're interested, stick around and stay tuned. Okay, a little bit of backstory. If you're not interested in this and don't like listen to me waffle on, I'll put a timestamp or something down here somewhere. Click and skip straight to the buggy. For those that are interested, backstory. Well, where I live, it's very picturesque. It's very beautiful. We've got mountains, rivers. I can see Mount Fuji from the window. It's for outdoor sports, it's ideal. But one thing we do not have is an outdoor off-road RC circuit. Not one. We got a couple of on-road ones, but no outdoor one. That was until middle of last year when a new RC circuit opened up quite locally to me, indoor carpet track. Well, once I heard about it, I wasted no time in going down to check it out. And what I'll do is I'll put some footage of my very first few laps at that circuit, running the DTO2 MS. Nah, it was such a blast. It was, I think it was nearly 30 years since I'd last driven on an off-road circuit, driven on road circuits and stuff, but yeah, 30 years since I'd driven off-road. It was such a blast. I had a great time. The DTO2 just struggled though. It didn't have the power and performance to clear a couple of jumps in a row like a high-end buggy, so I had to slow down, which is a good thing because the circuit is very technical and my driving skills, as I soon learned, are really poor, especially if you're just not used to running on a circuit. But I really enjoyed myself and I went back about several times over the last year. As you know, I really love driving my cars. I don't really have any shelf queens per se. I mean, I tell a lie, there's a Avanti just behind the camera there and a Boomerang and a few other bits and pieces lying around, but I can never really resist the urge to drive them once I've built them. But having said that, I don't bash and I try to look after them, mainly just because I just want to have to keep buying parts to fix them. And so the circuit, I pretty much always ran my DTO2 MS simply because it was my most modern buggy and I felt it was the most suited to circuit use, and also I could just get parts really easily for it. But nevertheless, pretty much every time I went, my poor driving skills, and it's quite a small technical circuit, just invariably led to breakages, many breakages. And so for the longest time I've been wanting to pick up a high-end buggy. Part of the reason I've hesitated is simply because of the extra costs involved. Pretty much all of my fleet of RCs run brush motors and nickel metal hydride batteries, but once you go to high end, I'm afraid LiPo is pretty much your only option. So I knew that getting to high end is going to be initially quite expensive. Anyway, that's a bit of backstory. So if you're interested, stick around and I'll tell you what I thought of the YZ-2 Cal 3.1. So the Yokomo YZ-2 Cal 3.1. Now before I go any further, I feel I should state this review is intended for people who have no experience building modern day high-end buggies. If you're a veteran racer with a lot of experience, I don't think you're going to find anything of use in this review. So what is the Cal 3.1? Well, most modern buggies tend to come in two different configurations depending on where you plan to run the buggy. So an outdoor dirt configuration and then an indoor carpet configuration. There are lots of small differences between the two, but the primary one is the indoor carpet version tends to be a high grip surface, so it uses a standard gear diff, whereas the outdoor one uses a ball diff. I mean, there are other differences as well. Now at this point I think we should talk about prices. How expensive is it to get into high end? So what I'll do is I'll put up on screen now the cost compared to vintage two-wheel drive re-releases from Tamiya and Kyosho, and then also more modern day two-wheel drive buggies and how they compare. As you can see, the Yokomo is considerably more expensive, and that doesn't tell the whole story because with the Yokomo kit and most high-end kits as well, what you would normally get included with, say for example, a Tamiya or a Kyosho kit, you do not get in the Yokomo kit. So things like wheels and tires pinion gear, etc. And all these things have to be purchased separately and add to the cost. Now with some things like tires, I can understand they're going to be circuit track specific, but I didn't understand the thinking behind not including wheels, but there we go. Now there wasn't much point in me doing an unboxing video because well, if you're expecting everything to be neatly presented like it would be in a high-end Kyosho or Tamiya kit, you're going to be disappointed. It's just all thrown in the box, so no real need for an unboxing video. And I just want to touch briefly on the manual. If you're used to building Kyosho and Tamiya kits, then you're going to find yourself right at home with the Yokomo manual. It's very easy to understand. It's complicated, but that's mainly just due to the nature of the buggy you're building. Everything is concise, labeled. Yokomo follow a build pattern similar to Kyosho, in which you have numbered bags, and the first step starts with bag 1. You open bag 1, use the parts in bag 1, and then move on to bag 2, etc. The only difference is Yokomo use a separate screw bag in which all the screws are contained, so you're going to need some kind of like parts tray to empty those screws in. But the build is straightforward, there's no issues there. If you've built kits before, you're going to have no problem building this Yokomo kit. Having said that, some parts can be a little tricky just because of the amount of variation you can choose in setting in the buggy up, things like suspension angle and those kind of things, but for the most part it's a straightforward build. And so before we go any further, I think it's time for a reveal. So this is the finished buggy. Okay, so originally I had planned to do a build video, a short build series on this, but my plans changed primarily because as I was putting it together, there were several things that I wasn't sure about. So I ended up looking on YouTube and I came across a really good build video. I'll put a link in the description. It's by a channel called Hearns Hobbies, and the build video is for the dirt version of the YZ-2, the DTM, with Brett and Simon, their names are. Now this is a full in-depth build review video. It's like 5 parts long. Each part is like more than an hour. It's very in-depth and they really do know their stuff, and I learned a whole lot watching their build videos, so I didn't think there was much point in me trying to put one together. So I'll link below. If you're going to build a YZ-2, I highly recommend you go and check out their channel. I consider myself quite a competent builder, but I learned so much from watching their video. One standout thing for me was and I'm not embarrassed to admit this, I had no idea that people applied shock grease to the O-rings in the shocks when they were building them to prevent oil leaks. I had no idea such a thing was done. I'd never seen it written in a manual before, but that's just one example of many where watching their video was quite enlightening. Now, as the YZ-2 is a high-end racing buggy, when you're putting it together, you've got so many points of customization, particularly when it comes to suspension and setup like that. So things like the obvious ones, camber and tow-in, but other things like anti-squat, skid angle, caster, etc. Most of those I'm quite comfortable with. However, there was one point when it came to you can customize the height of the diff inside the gearbox. I never encountered that before, so again, I found their video very useful as a kind of basis to understand what these changes would do to the buggy handling. So I highly recommend you go and check out their channel and go and check out the videos in particular on the build of the DTM version of the Cal YZ-2. Now, with the chassis done, it was time to turn my attention to the body, and regular viewers to this channel will know that I tend to gravitate more to simple paint schemes and more simple designs. Partly that's due to my terrible painting skills, but also I just prefer the aesthetic. Well, I realized with the Cal3.1 that would not be a good idea, simply because you get very little in the way of decals. There's no like window edge frames or anything like that. In fact, you just get a few logo decals and that's about it. So I realized that my usual one color scheme wouldn't work too well unless I started using decals from other builds. So I decided, it's been quite a while, but I had to go to a 3-color paint scheme, which turned out quite good, even if I do say so myself. I'd forgotten how much masking is involved when you're doing multiple colors on a polycarbonate body. Now the polycarbonate is reasonable quality. The wing is very high quality, but the body itself, I would put it similar to Tamiya, similar to Kyosho, nothing standoutish. And speaking of the wing, I actually spoke to a couple of people down the circuit. Mainly I was interested why people don't really bother painting them, and the general consensus is wings are almost like consumable. They get ripped off and damaged quite easily, so there's little point in spending a lot of time painting them. Likewise, although the back of the wing you can cut, there's various different cut lines. My first instinct was to kind of take into consideration speed, downforce and things like that, but everybody just said, oh, just try to avoid cutting it down as much as possible, because the more material you leave at the back, the better the bracing is, and the less time you're gonna, less possibility of you ripping the wing off and damaging the wing. And then finally I noticed a lot of people had a kind of like frosted effect on the polycarbonate, and I just assumed they were spraying some clear matte on it, but apparently you just grab a Scotch-Brite pad and scuff up both sides of the polycarbonate, and that's the look you get. Now that it's all together, I can kind of appreciate why cab forward design is so predominant at the moment. I mean, I'm not a fan of the cab forward design. I much prefer vintage looks, but you can see basically with the two-wheel drive chassis layout, they want to put the battery right in the middle of the chassis, which kind of forces the ESC to be moved forward just behind the steering servo. And since most ESCs tend to be quite tall with a fan on top, you just need the body to have extra, vertical clearance in that area. And it's simply a case of the electronics layout dictating the shape of the body. It is what it is. But now I put it together, I don't think it looks half bad. I mean, sure, it's no vintage buggy, but it looks okay. And then finally, the electronics. Now, if I'm honest, electronics was a large part of the reason why I've hesitated so long in getting into high-end buggy racing. I am old school in a big way when it comes to electronics. Virtually everything I own is running brushed motors and nickel metal hydride batteries. In fact, until I got this buggy, I did not own a LiPo, and it's mainly just because for my usage and my use case, the hassle, the extra care needed to use a LiPo is just not justifiable, and so I always kind of shied away from them. The performance gains from LiPo batteries are undeniable, but the extra care needed, discharging and things like that, it's just more hassle than it was worth for me, so I always stuck with nickel metal hydride. Now obviously with a high-end buggy, that is not an option, so I needed to invest in shorty LiPo battery packs in order to get running. Electronics wise, again, I am a huge Futaba fan, and all my builds basically use Futaba receivers and Futaba servos. But as I was on a budget and Futaba tends to be expensive, I was recommended to go with Savox, and I'm glad I did. I got a very nice metal geared Savox servo. Incidentally, the high-end buggies, I don't know if it's just the Yokomo or all of them, but they have no servo saver, so you definitely need a strong metal geared servo, because there is no servo saver. Whether it's an option, I don't know, but included in the kit, there is no servo saver. So yeah, I picked up a Savox servo. I'm using the receiver out of my now retired DT02 MS, and for the motor in ESC, I was recommended a 13.5 Hobby Ring brushless combo. So I think it's the JR10 or something like that, the just stock ESC and 13.5 turn brushless motor. I thought that would be kind of high for my skill level, but I was recommended it, so I'm just going to go with that. And I suppose I can dial down the speed if I need to. So what do I think of the Yokomo YZ-2 Cal 3.1 now that it's built? Well, fantastic. I am so glad that I took the plunge and picked up this high-end buggy. The build has been really enjoyable. Technical, yes, I'm certainly not for a novice builder, but I have learned so much. It's been very educational building experience and an eye-opener as well. In the course of putting it together, I spent a lot of time online researching and just picked up so many tips, build tips and new techniques and ways of doing things. Now the kit itself, the quality as you would expect is top notch. It goes together really easily. Standard equipment is generally very good. I mean, obviously everything is turnbuckles and universals, things like that, bearings are all standard equipment. It's a little disappointing that that things like wheels are not included in the kit, but it is what it is. Overall, I'm very pleased with the Yokomo YZ-2 Cal3.1 and looking forward to taking it to my local circuit and seeing what it can do, and hopefully not breaking it. Well, those are my thoughts as an old school retro Tamiya RC kit builder on his first modern day high-end buggy build. Apologies, this video has ended up being a lot longer than I expected, and as a review of the buggy itself, I'm guessing it's not exactly brilliant. You're probably going to find better reviews of the buggy from elsewhere. This is really just my thoughts as someone who has a lot of experience with old school buggies but very little with new modern day designs. Well, my name is David and you've been watching KCRC. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.